And action. Oh wait. And action. Welcome to episode number 18 of the Friday podcast. Sending positive vibrations and frequencies to all of you.
When I sit back and think about it, my whole life's a blessing. Caffeine pills and trees keep me from the stress and codeine to expense to keep the family, but I ain't just like none ever before. Across the map we see each other grow and more mature. I'm so for sure, I'm so for certain. Right before they drop the curtain. Thank you for today and pray for tomorrow, cause I know it is certain.
God bless.
But I ain't crazy. But I ain't crazy. I ain't crazy.
Yeah.
I go hard like concrete, asphalt, love the street, allow for the late night cruising, flowing to the beat, allow for the swish of sweets and all the sweet flowers. Have you ever looked at ants and noticed plants are like towers? Trees are probably never ending, or maybe they know the reason we all grow, probably not their life flows with no evil influence, just survive, work, and fuck. Imagine life as a duck, flying when I want, take a swim with the swan in the pond like a pin. I ain't gonna lie, I'm super high, but admit it be a trick. Or maybe life as a lion, king of the jungle, beast mode down the rumble. Well, despite our mental weakness, I'm blessed to be human. We're all actors on the stage like I'm curious dreaming. Thank God for everything in the Son Christ's name. We wouldn't understand a thing if it wasn't for pain. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Amen. I ain't crazy, but I ain't crazy.
But I ain't crazy.
But I ain't crazy. But I ain't crazy. Cause it don't phase you, homie. We ain't crazy.
Yo, thank y'all for tuning in again. Shout out to my homeboy Louis P that I haven't seen in a minute, but I love that cat, man. A little preview to the episode. We have a free comic book day turned into free comic book summer book of the day. We also have the crystal of the day, which is Pyrite. Beautiful. And then we're gonna go, I'm gonna do a little bit of, talk a little bit about some stuff from this amazing book that everybody should check out if they can. Yeah. Never finished that song right there. The beat is so amazing, man. I might just have to finish it and put on this new EP or mixtape or something. Yeah. Drop a little freestyle real quick. Yo. I'm high as heaven. I'm on that cloud 11. Shout out to all the real hustler reverends. The ones that have to go to work and still preach. Yeah. The ones that hustles then teach. The ones that still break a sweat. Yeah. Cause that's a bet. Yeah. Shout out to the real motherfuckers out there. Now let me hit this last little boat before we get started real quick. This last little pinch. Now join Chris Chaos. And I thank you. Okay. So last episode, I went off on it was like a side story. Because the ones previous before that, if you have been following, I've been covering this show called Timeless. That's on Hulu, catch that shit. And it's about time travel and Illuminati, all right, and history, right? So, and it's family friendly because it was on NBC. So check that shit out. So back to that. Today I'm gonna talk about the Alamo. Shout out to Texas. Shout out to Mexico. So there's some things that I learned about the Alamo that we didn't get taught correctly in school. That also took me down a couple paths, like to Spain Okay, and then also to Mexico and Texas, of course, and the United States. So let's see. So it's this is Timeless Season 1, Episode 5, The Alamo. So in the last episode, Rittenhouse had threatened Rufus, who's the driver of the time machine. Shout out T for time machine. They threatened him by shutting down. He had like a Tesla car, right? An electric car, computerized. And in that episode, Connor Mason tells Rufus, now that you know what they're capable of, you have to cooperate. So like they were like driving behind him in another high-tech car. They shut it down. And they're like, hey, yo, you need to start cooperating, because they wanted him to spy on what became his friends, but he didn't want to. So they had to threaten him. Anyway, so they show up because Garcia Flint, apparently somehow in the show, the science shows that they can pinpoint the time that the other time machine ends up. I think it's the mothership, and then they're using the I don't know. There's two different time machines. So they pinpoint that he went to March 2nd, 1836, San Antonio, days before the Alamo battle. Garcia Flynn meets with General Santa Anna, excuse me. Tells him he's from Spain with gold from Queen Isabella II, who was the Queen of Spain at the time. Okay. I looked into Queen Isabella. You know, if I would have had more time, I would have just, there's so many avenues I could have taken, but I did a little bit of research on her. So she was kind of interesting. She was born on, she was, she was born October 10th, 1830, and she died April 9th, 1904. So looking at that, the numbers, her death, it looks, because there's 49 and then 94, and then her birth 1010. She was the Queen of Spain from 1833 to 1868. She was deposed in the Glorious Revolutions. All right, so a big theme that we're gonna have today is revolutions, because Spain went through a revolution, Texas is going through a revolution, Mexico just went through a revolution, all in this time period, like very close together. So I wonder, it was probably like, it's a very interesting time. She was born in the Glorious Revolutions of 1868. So it's like 30 years after the San Antonio battle. Formally abdicated in 1870. Her son, which the Alamo was like not long after Mexico got independence from Spain. Her son, Alfonso the 12th, became king in 1874. 100 years before the birth of America, the United States. On 10/10/1846, on her birthday, the moderate party made their 16-year-old queen marry her double first cousin. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yo, these monarch things and shit, these motherfuckers, bro, all this shit they get into with this fucking inbreeding, yo, it's sick. And when you start looking into that, it's very prominent in a lot of royal families, and then if you look into the Kabbalah and shit, the 13 families, like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and all the motherfuckers. So on her birthday, she was 16. So for her sweet 16, the moderate party made their 16-year-old, I forgot, she was queen from 1830, so she was queen at a young age. And she was 3 years old. No wonder she got ousted. She didn't. Wow. And then they made her marry her double first cousin. She was disgusted by the marriage and said, "What shall I tell you about a man whom I saw wearing more lace than I was wearing on our wedding night?" So she says that, I mean, you know, it's in layman, in modern English. She says that this cat was wearing more lace than she was. So, like, I guess he was wearing, like, lingerie and shit. More than she was on their wedding night. Her hubby cuz was gay. Her son became, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just what he was. Sorry, I got stuffy notes. Shout out to everybody who, well, not shout out to everybody who knows about breathing, but let me let everybody know. Here's a shout out. Shout out breathing. You know, they tell you we're supposed to breathe a certain way. You know, in through your nose, out. And you do that when you're meditating and when you're trying to calm down. And really, that's how we're supposed to be breathing the whole time. So it's hard to remember that. So let's see. Her son, who became king, was fathered by a captain of the guard. His name was Enrique Buegmolto y Mayans. She publicly announced her love, and her reputation crumbled. She was only 17 years old when she announced. So she was only a year into her faux marriage with her gay cousin, double first cousin. She was stabbed at one point, but the gold corset that she had on saved her. Whoa. You know, she was young. She was put into this status, and people hated her because she didn't love the person that they wanted her to love, but it wasn't her fault. Shout out to Queen Isabella II from Spain. And the reason I started talking about this, I started learning about her, was because the lie that Garcia Flynn tells General Santa Anna is that he has gold from Spain because she wants to help crush the rebellion. Because Texas makes the United States substantially stronger. I.e. Rittenhouse, which is, in my opinion, an interpretation of the Rothschilds. So he was just trying to disrupt that, right? And so I had to learn about Queen Isabella of Spain because I never heard of her before. And I have Spanish blood. So it was interesting. And then plus, you know, women in history. We don't learn a lot about women in history. So when there's timeless is cool because it's modern and it doesn't like force it down your throat, this PC bullshit, but it shows perspectives of other people in history, not just the men. So let's see. Her people were supposed to meet with Napoleon, but the French were late, stylishly, and the meeting never happened. Her people, the Spanish were like, fuck that. Let's get the fuck out of here. Have you seen The Irishman? It reminds me of The Irishman. When they're late and Pacino's like, you know, you're always fucking late. So let's see. Queen Isabella II continues. Spain's glorious revolution. There was wariness of moderates who were alienated by the crown. This is why they had a revolution. All right, and then we're gonna get to why there's a revolution in Texas, and then we'll get to why that there was the Mexico War, plus kind of a Spanish War too, in order to manifest California and all that shit that Spain and Mexico owns. So the wariness of moderates in Spain were alienated by the crown, and the progressives were barely having a chance to rule. And a lot of people didn't like her personal behavior, as we were talking about. The corruption, the abortion of the possibility of political reform, and the economic crisis alienating the middle class. All right, so let's go back to the Alamo battle. It was from February 23rd to March 6, 1836. 3636. Pivotal event in Texas Revolution. Texas makes the U.S. stronger. Originally, Santa Anna let the women and children leave. So Flynn kind of fucks that up. So he shoots. He shoot because Santa Anna decides like, nah, I'm not gonna do what you want me to do, and I'm gonna kill the kids and the women and everybody. Flynn fucks that up, so he shoots Colonel Travis before he wrote the famous letter that rallied the U.S. to Texas, and that was called Victory or Death. A year before the Alamo, at the siege of Bexar, or Bejar, it's in San Antonio, Texas. That was on October 12th, and it went all the way to December 11th, 1835. It was a Texian, we call them Texans now, we're Texans now, but back then it was called Texian victory, only major victory besides San Jacinto, and it was the longest Texian campaign of the Texas Revolution. John Smith was Travis's messenger to General Houston, and he became the first mayor of San Antonio. In the show, he's a kid, right? And he almost dies, but one of the characters, the military dude who's with him so originally he's there to take out Flynn because Flynn stole that property and had to get the government involved into private industry, which was Rittenhouse. Next episode, I think it's next episode, we get into the Watergate scandal, which is a very interesting, it's going to be a good episode. So, let's see, the Alamo, there were more than 189 people defending the fort. Not all of which were American settlers. The defenders numbered well over 200 and included a number of Native Mexicans, Europeans, and 2 Africans. Reasons for the Texas Revolution. By the time Mexico gained its independence from Spain, Americans were already on and over the border, and America really wanted it. They encouraged Americans to migrate to Mexican Texas after 1821. Probably because I don't know what, I wrote this down. There's a financial panic swept U.S. in 1819. Without a multitude of Anglo-Americans in Texas, a revolutionary war would not have broken out in Texas in 1835. Another factor, preoccupied with internal disputes in the immediate aftermath of her own struggle for independence, Texas drifted away during 1821-1835. In 36, Texas broke away from Mexico and declared itself the Lone Star Republic. On that, all right, so here's some things that, so in 1845, U.S. brought the Texas into the Union. Mexico at the time included New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, California, and part of Colorado. So Travis was killed early in fighting. Bowie probably killed in his bed because he was ill. Crockett was probably captured and later executed, despite what is told more often than not. Houston had recommended a retreat, but Travis, bolstered by overconfident men, among them Bowie, ignored these recommendations from Houston. Shout out to H-Town. Many of the defenders were unaware of their inevitable death, despite what the narrative is, and everybody knew that they were fighting to the death. Many did not know. Crockett wanted to organize a guerrilla attack. Falsehood that the defenders of the Alamo were righteous revolutionaries oppressed by the tyrannical Mexican regime. Yeah, that wasn't factual. Okay, so as I was doing research for that, I was like, yo, let me check this book out because I haven't read all of it, but let me see if they have anything on the topic. And lo and behold, there's a chapter. Well, you know, I went to the index. Shout out to the index, and I looked up Texas, Maine, third coast. In the chapter 8, it's we take nothing by conquest, thank God. And here's just a couple little highlights that I found interesting, that I feel like you'll find interesting, whether or not you're from Texas, just because this is history. I mean, it could have changed the path of history, but this is hear of the acceptance by the Texas Convention of the annexation resolutions of our Congress. He is immediately to proceed with his. Okay, so this is this is a soldier who wrote in his diary, right? And for Fort Jessup, Louisiana, June 30th, 1845. Orders came last evening by express from Washington City, directing General Taylor to move without any delay to some point on the coast near the Sabine or elsewhere. And as soon as he shall hear the acceptance by the Texas Convention of the annexation resolutions of our Congress, he is immediately to proceed with his whole command to the extreme western border of Texas and take up a position on the banks of or near the Rio Grande. And he is to expel any armed force of Mexicans who may cross that river. Bliss read the orders to me last evening hastily at Tattoo. I have scarcely slept a wink, thinking of the needful preparations. I am now noting at reveille by candlelight and waiting the signal for muster. Violence leads to violence. And if this movement of ours does not lead to others and to bloodshed, I am much mistaken. And this is a soldier named Colonel Ethan Allen Hitchcock. Yo, this book right here by Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States, it's from the people of the United States. So it says, Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase had doubled the territory of the United States. It extended to the Rocky Mountains. To the southwest was Mexico, which had won its independence in the Revolutionary War against Spain. Shout out to Queen Isabella, in 1821, which I don't think she was alive yet. No, she wasn't alive yet. A large country which included Texas and what are now New Mexico, Utah, I said this earlier, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, California, and Colorado. After agitation and aid from the United States, Texas broke off from Mexico in 1836, which I said earlier, and declared itself the Lone Star Republic, which was right before the break. So it's not deja vu. Okay, so I don't know why I wrote that. So in the White House at the time was James Polk, a Democrat and expansionist who on the night of his inauguration confided to his Secretary of the Navy that one of his main objectives was the acquisition of California. His order to General Taylor was to move troops to the Rio Grande was a challenge to the Mexicans. It was not at all clear that the Rio Grande was the southern boundary of Texas, although Texas has forced the defeated Mexican General Santa Anna to say so when he was a prisoner. The traditional border between Texas and Mexico had been the Nueces River, about 150 miles to the north, and both Mexico and the United States had recognized that as the border. However, Polk, the president at the time, encouraged the Texans to accept annexation and had assured them he would uphold their claims to the Rio Grande. Ordering troops to the Rio Grande into territory inhabited by Mexicans was clearly a provocation. Taylor had once denounced the idea of the annexation of Texas, but now that he had his marching orders, his attitude seemed to change. His visit to the tent of his aide, Hitchcock, to discuss the move is described in Hitchcock's diary. He seems to have lost all respect for Mexicans' rights and is willing to be an instrument of Mr. Polk for pushing our boundary as far west as possible. When I told him that, if he suggested a movement which he told me he intended, Mr. Polk would seize upon it and throw the responsibility on him. He at once said he would take it and added that if the president instructed him to use his discretion, he would ask no orders, but would go upon the Rio Grande as soon as he could get transportation. I think the general wants an additional brevet and will strain a point to get it. So Taylor moved his troops to Corpus Christi, Texas, just across the Nueces River, and waited for their instructions. They came in February 46 of 1800 to go down the Gulf Coast to the Rio Grande. Taylor's armies marched in parallel columns across the open prairie, scouts far ahead, and on the flanks a train of supplies following. Then along a narrow road through a belt of thick chaparral they arrived, March 28, 1846, in cultivated fields and thatched roof huts hurriedly abandoned by the Mexican occupants who fled across the river to the city of Matamoros. Taylor set up camp, began construction of a fort, and planted his cannons facing the white houses of Matamoros, whose inhabitants stared curiously at the sight of an army on the banks of a quiet river. The Washington Union, a newspaper expressing the position of President Polk in the Democratic Party, had spoken early in 1845 on the meaning of Texas annexation. Let the great measure of annexation be accomplished, and with it the questions of boundary and claims. For who can arrest the torrent that will pour onward to the west? The road to California will be open to us. Who will stay the march of our western people? So they could have meant a peaceful march westward, except for other words in the same newspaper. A corps of properly organized volunteers would invade, overrun, and occupy Mexico. They would enable us not only to take California, but to keep it. It was shortly after that, in the summer of 1845, that John O'Sullivan, editor of the Democratic Review, used the phrase that became famous, saying it was our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. Yes, manifest destiny. All that was needed in the spring of 1846 was a military incident to begin the war that Polk wanted. It came in April, when General Taylor's quartermaster, Colonel Cross, while riding up the Rio Grande, disappeared. His body was found 11 days later, his skull smashed by a heavy blow. It was assumed he had been killed by Mexican guerrillas crossing the river. In a solemn military ceremony visible to the Mexicans of Matamoros, crowding onto roofs of their houses across the Rio Grande, Cross was buried with a religious service and 3 volleys of rifle fire. The next day, April 25th, a patrol of Taylor's soldiers were surrounded and attacked by Mexicans and wiped out. 16 dead, others wounded, the rest captured. Taylor sent a message to the governors of Texas and Louisiana asking them to recruit 5,000 volunteers. He had been authorized to do this by the White House before he left for Texas, and he sent a dispatch to Polk. Hostilities may now be considered as commenced. That means war is beginning. The Mexicans had fired the first shot, but they had done what the American government wanted. According to Colonel Hitchcock, who wrote in his diary, even before those first incidents, I have said from the first that the United States are the aggressors. We have not one particle of right to be here. It looks as if the government sent a small force on purpose to bring on a war, so as to have a pretext for taking California and as much of this country as it chooses. For whatever becomes from this army, there is no doubt of a war between the United States and Mexico. My heart is not in this business, but as a military man, I am bound to execute orders. And before those first clashes, Taylor had sent dispatches to Polk, which led the president to note the probabilities are that hostilities might take place soon. On May 9th, before news of any battle, Polk was suggesting to his cabinet a declaration of war based on certain money claims against Mexico and on Mexico's recent rejection of an American negotiator named John Slidell. It doesn't sound like a trustworthy dude. I might have rejected him too. Polk recorded in his diary what he said to the cabinet meeting. I stated that up to this time, as we knew, we had heard of no open acts of aggression by the Mexican army, but that the danger was imminent that such acts would be committed. I said that in my opinion, we had such ample cause of war and that it was impossible that I could remain silent much longer, than that the country was excited and impatient on the subject. The country was not excited and impatient, but the president was. When the dispatches arrived from General Taylor telling of casualties from the Mexican attack, Polk summoned the cabinet to hear the news, and they unanimously agreed he should ask for a declaration of war. So let's see. Polk spoke of the dispatch of American troops to the Rio Grande as the necessary measures of defense. As John Schroeder says in Mr. Polk's War, indeed the reverse was true. President Polk had incited war by sending American soldiers into what was disputed territory, historically controlled and inhabited by Mexicans. Very interesting, guys. A handful of anti-slavery congressmen voted against all war measures, seeing the Mexican campaign as a means of extending the southern slave territory. The American Anti-Slavery Society, on the other hand, said, I say on the other hand because it goes back and forth, but they're on the same side as the congressmen that were anti-slavery. On the other hand, said the war was waged solely for the detestable and horrible purpose of extending and perpetrating American slavery throughout the vast territory of Mexico. They didn't teach us that in school. A 27-year-old Boston poet and abolitionist, James Russell Lowell, began writing satirical poems in the Boston Courier. They were later collected as the Biglow Papers. In them, a New England farmer, Hosea Biglow, spoke in his own dialect on the war. As for war, I call it murder. There you have it, plain and flat. I don't want to go no further. In my testament for that. I'm reading as it's written. They may talk of freedom's airy, till they're purple in the face. It's a grand, great cemetery for the birthrights of our race. They just want this California, so's to lug new slave states in, to abuse ye and to scorn ye and to plunder ye like sin. And that was a farmer busting flows, man. The war had barely begun the summer of 1846 when a writer who lived in Concord, Massachusetts, refused to pay his Massachusetts poll tax, denouncing the Mexican War. He was put in jail, spent one night. His friends, without his consent, paid his tax, and he was released. He later printed an essay called Civil Disobedience, talking about the law. The racism of Parker was widespread. Congressman Delano of Ohio, an anti-slavery Whig, which is a Republican, opposed the war because he was afraid of, I think it's a Republican, a Whig, because over here they're saying Democrats. I'm not sure. There was racism on both sides. Opposed the war because he was afraid of Americans mingling with an inferior people who embrace all shades of color. The Mexicans, a sad compound of Spanish, English, Indian, and Negro bloods, and resulting, it is said, in the production of slothful, ignorant race of beings. But as the war went on, opposition grew. The American Peace Society printed a newspaper, The Advocate of Peace, which published poems, speeches, petitions, sermons against the war, and eyewitness accounts of the degradation of army life and the horrors of battle. As the army moved closer to Mexico City, the Liberator daringly declared its wishes for the defeat of the American forces. Every lover of freedom and humanity throughout the world must wish them, the Mexicans, the most triumphant success. We only hope that if blood has had to flow, that has been that of the Americans, and this is Americans writing this, and that the next news we shall hear will be that General Scott and his army are in the hands of the Mexicans. We wish him and his troops no bodily harm, but the most utter defeat and disgrace. Frederick Douglass, former slave, extraordinary speaker, and writer, wrote in his Rochester newspaper, the North Star, on January 21st, 1848, of the present disgraceful, cruel, and iniquitous war with our sister republic. Mexico seems a doomed victim to Anglo-Saxon cupidity and love of dominion. Douglass was scornful of the willingness of opponents of the war to take real action. Even the abolitionists kept paying their taxes. The determination of our slave-holding president to prosecute the war and the probability of his success in wringing from the people men and money to carry on is made evident rather than doubtful by the puny opposition arrayed against him. No politician, and this is the Frederick Douglass, no politician of any considerable distinction or eminence seems willing to hazard his popularity with his party. Not many people are willing, like Frederick Douglass said, Frederick Douglass, no politician of any considerable distinction or eminence seems willing to hazard his popularity with his party. Anyway, by an open and unqualified disapprobation of war, none seem willing to take their stand for peace at all risks, and all seem willing that the war should be carried on in some form or the other. Where was the popular opinion? It is hard to say. After the first rush, enlistments began to dwindle. The 1846 election showed much anti-Polk sentiment, but who could tell how much of this was due to the war? In Massachusetts, Congressman Robert Winthrop, who had voted for the war, was elected overwhelmingly against an anti-war Whig. Schroeder concludes that although Polk's popularity fell, general enthusiasm for the Mexican War remained high. But this is a guess. There are no surveys of public opinion at that time. As for voting, the majority of people did not vote at all. And how did these non-voters feel about the war? Historians of the Mexican War have talked easily about the people and public opinion, like Justin H. Smith, whose 2-volume work, The War with Mexico, has long been a standard account. Of course, too, all the pressure of warlike sentiment among their people had to be recognized more or less, for such is the nature of popular government. Smith's evidence, however, is not from the people, but from the newspapers, claiming to be the voice of the people. And it sounds familiar. The New York Herald, we'll see that. So in the newspaper now, it's probably more honest, but it's still owned by, it just depends. I don't know. Shout out to independent journalists. The New York Herald wrote in 1845, the multitude cried aloud for war. And the New York Journal of Commerce, half playfully, half seriously wrote, "Let us go to war. The world has become stale and insipid. The ships ought to be all captured and the cities battered down, and the world burned up so that we can start again." Whoa. There would be fun in that, some interest, something to talk about. Yo, there's some people who feel like that now. You see some of these cities right now. The New York Morning News said young and ardent spirits that throng the cities want but a direction to their restless energies, and their attention is already fixed on Mexico. Were the newspapers reporting a feeling in the public or creating a feeling in the public? Those reporting these feelings, like Justin Smith, themselves expressed strong views about the need for war. Smith, who dedicates his book to Henry Cabot Lodge, one of the ultra-expansionists of American history, makes a long list of Mexican sins against the United States, and ends by saying, "It is rested with our government, therefore, as the agent of national dignity and interest, to apply a remedy." He comments on Polk's call for war. In truth, no other course would have been patriotic or even rational. It says it is impossible to know the extent of popular support for the war, but there is evidence that many organized working men opposed the war. Earlier, when the annexation of Texas was being considered, working men meeting in New England protested the annexation. Interesting. A newspaper in Manchester, New Hampshire wrote, "We have therefore held our peace in regard to the annexation of Texas, for the purpose of seeing whether our nation would attempt so base an action. We call it base because it would be given men that live upon the blood of others an opportunity of dipping their hands still deeper in the sin of slavery. Have we not slaves enough now?" There were demonstrations of Irish workers in New York, Boston, and Lowell against the annexation of Texas. Philip Fauner reports. In May, when the war against Mexico began, New York workingmen called a meeting to oppose the war, and many Irish workers came. Shout out to the Irish, man. And the Irish, man, the Vikings couldn't even fuck with the Irish. Nobody could fuck with the Irish. The British couldn't fuck with the Irish. I don't even think the fucking, the Romans could fuck with the Irish, you know. Let's see where we at in time. 47 minutes. So we know a little of the Mexican soldiers. We do know that Mexico was a despotism, a land of Indians and mestizos, Indians mixed with Spanish, controlled by criollos, 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 were whites of Spanish blood. There was 1 million criollos, 2 million mestizos, 3 million Indians. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay, let's take one more break before we get to some lighter topics. X-Men. I found it very interesting. So if you know, because of quarantine, that rhyme, they're giving out a new comic book like every week of the summer, it seems like. And this one was kind of cool because lately I had been learning about white magic. If you've seen the episode last week, and if you notice, in this X-Men free comic book day, she has some special tarot cards, and these giant, beautiful pages right here. Look, there's Judgment. She's doing this reading. There's what's the next one? You can't see. 4 of Wands, right? And she goes on explaining. There's like these awesome X-Men themed tarot cards that she's reading. I think that's the last one right there, the 10 of Swords. And you see like Wolverine and Apocalypse and shit. It looks legit. And then there's a separate story which includes Iron Man. It's a little intro to Empire. Okay, it's a crossover with, as you can see, Fantastic Four and the Avengers. It's pretty dope, right? So it's just some regular shit going on at first, some regular fighting, and then boom! Iron Man's foot gets fucking chopped off, boy, by a fucking plane, man. Fucking crazy. And then, what was it, Pepper Potts or whatever? This fiery redhead finds him, and he says, it's all gone dark. Before the lights went out forever, and it's the Dark Ages. Coming fall 2020. So it looks all right. And then also Empire is coming out. So the second one was kind of confusing, but it was dope because it showed, you know, Iron Man getting his fucking foot chopped off. So let's talk about, that was the comic book of the week. Let's talk about the crystal of the week. It's Pyrite. Okay. And I chose Pyrite because it's also called Fool's Gold. And that's related to California because of the gold rush. Which used to be part of Mexico, which is part of this episode. And then Pancho Villa, who I'm wearing on my shirt, was assassinated July 20th, 1923. He was part of another, it was another Mexican revolution. He was a commander of the Division of the North in the Constitutionalist Army. He was a military landowner of the northern Mexican state of Chihuahua. Born June 5th, 1878 in La Coyotada, Mexico. So, I mean, it seems like a lot of this stuff was like a long time ago, but nah, man, it was just a couple of generations ago. So anyway, Pyrite. This one's a shiny one of my favorite ones. Not every part of it is shiny. There's some parts that are like stone, right? But it's beautiful. It vibrates to the third chakra, solar plexus. I think is the third chakra. Shout out to the metaphysical ways. I'm just reading this off of that. I didn't do a lot of research this time. I'm just reading off of it. Major prosperity stone. Prosperity. Reduces depression, anxiety, frustration and false hopes. It grounds, it calms, it brings consistency to everyday life, builds up etheric bodies. I don't know what that means. Creativity, vitality, action, willpower, confidence, manifestation, mental clarity, focus, aids in overcoming bad habits. All in with the help of Pyrite. It's beautiful, isn't it? Just like all you viewers are beautiful. Please like, subscribe, share. Let's go out with a bazang.